The general public is cordially invited, yes, anyone who wishes to attend the nutrition service. We are here to serve you from Monday to Friday, from 8 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, with your host Magdalena Aguilar.
Mexico is one of the countries that is currently experiencing one of the worst femicide crises worldwide, with figures that seem to have no respite. And the case of Magdalena Aguilar Romero falls into that terrible trend. She was a young 28-year-old nutritionist and mother of two who said enough to the violence from her husband. That's how she left her home, took control of her life, and gradually became that woman full of light that everyone knew. She seemed to have narrowly avoided becoming another statistic of women worn out by their partners. However, her ex-husband had other plans. The monster couldn't accept that she could be happy without him. On January 13, 2018, at 5:30 in the afternoon, Magdalena contacted her mom and told her that she would see her later at the church after picking up her children from her ex-husband's house, named Cesar Gomez Arquiniega. The only times they coincided was when she picked up her children, who spent a few days with him each week. Her mother, on the other hand, waited for her as they had agreed, but her beloved daughter never arrived, and her case became one of the most atrocious in the current history of Mexico. But what happened to Magdalena Aguilar Romero, the person who once swore eternal love to her? Did he do something horrible to her? That's what I'll discuss in today's video. But the story of Magdalena Aguilar Romero and Cesar Gomez Arquiniega began in the year 2011, 7 years before this atrocity. It was love at first sight, and at first things didn't seem to be so bad between them. It was a common courtship, full of love and longing for a future together. 6 months after starting their relationship, the couple found out they were going to be parents. Thrilled about this milestone, they wed and moved in together. Now a family of 3, their love had brought forth their first child. However, that would also be the start of Magda's tumultuous life. The arrival of their first baby caused the woman to suspend her nutrition studies, as she dedicated herself completely to taking care of the little one, to the household chores as well, and to her husband. However, things were not happening as she had imagined. Shortly after, she became pregnant for the second time with a girl who took her even further away from her desires for individual development beyond being a mother. That decision to stay at home did not seem to fully satisfy the young woman. Well, as I was saying, she always had the drive to improve herself and finish her studies to give her family a better future.
It's a social service that your servant Magdalena Aguilar is offering. So, well, mainly all types of people are treated here. Children, pregnant women, teenagers, young people, adults, whether healthy or with some disease.
Magdalena didn't want to stand idly by, so with the support of her father, she resumed her dream of becoming a urologist. What she didn't imagine was that her husband would take her decision very badly. And that's because Cesar Gomez little by little began to show his true intentions, his true face. The man grew irritated by his wife going out to study. His controlling jealousy was the trigger for senseless arguments and the progressive deterioration of their romantic relationship. And although initially this relationship between Cesar and Magdalena was stable, little by little her husband's attitudes began to extinguish the dreams of the young nutritionist. Cesar, then 35 years old, began to develop paranoid personality disorder, or Othello syndrome, which is a mental disorder characterized by unjustified and obsessive jealousy. This then led him to exert psychological violence against Magda, whom he forbade from having contact with family and friends. The psychological violence that Magda suffered escalated to the point that the prohibitions also extended to her appearance. Cesar wouldn't let her wear makeup, controlled her way of dressing, and even forbade her from exercising. He even reproached her for having to move to the city of Iguala to continue her nutrition studies, because he only wanted the young woman to devote herself to taking care of him and their children. Fed up with the situation, obviously Magda asked her parents for help. They were bewildered. They had no idea that their son-in-law was a toxic person, a sick man fearing for their daughter. So the couple helps Magdalena and their grandchildren to leave the house where they lived with Cesar, moving away from that hostile environment. And at first, this could have saved her from her tragic end, but fate, you know that sometimes it's cruel. Despite Cesar's repeated pleas and promises to change, she refused to return to him, believing that people don't change. And despite the awkward situation between them, the two children they had in common continued to unite them. Magdalena never denied Cesar the cohabitation with the little ones, so they continued to see each other when the kids went from one house to the other. At each meeting, Cesar Gomez begged Magdalena to continue their marriage, but she was determined to reclaim everything that made her happy but had to abandon due to the violence she had to endure from this jerk. Thus, 3 years after the separation, Magda thought she was liberated, free from this past and this sick man. She had managed to settle down with her parents, completed her nutrition studies, and was even working in what she loved most. Then came the fateful 13th of January of the year 2018, and something unexpected happened. That day, Magdalena took her children to her father's house, as they had agreed, and then went to give some private consultations at the medical center where she worked. So she agreed to pick up the children at the Zocalo of the Magic Town when they finished their studies. However, to her surprise, Cesar never arrived with the children at the meeting point. Puzzled, she went to her ex-husband's house located on Guadalupe Street in the Los Adobes neighborhood, not knowing that she would never leave that place again. After Magdalena failed to show up at the church as she had agreed with her mother, named Maria de Los Angeles Romero Mazon, the woman sent multiple text messages to her daughter, but they were never answered. Worried about her and her grandchildren, she called, but it always went to voicemail. The worry not only invaded her mother, but also her entire family. One person was also on their minds, this guy, her former son-in-law. Determined to find her daughter, the mother went to Cesar's house to ask if he knew anything about her. And once she knocked on the door, she was greeted by the man himself and his mother-in-law, who assured her that Magda, as they affectionately called her, had been there but had left a while ago.
That was the last time my sister was seen. The days passed and I think many of you are here because you saw the post I made on Facebook, in which different people joined me to organize this march, and I appreciate
your support very much. A hunch, in the same way that something was wrong, made the mom join immediately. Thanks then to this bad feeling that invaded her. She noticed that her ex-son-in-law had some scratches on his face. Trying not to panic, the mom withdrew without raising suspicions and went straight to tell her relatives what she had seen. Bewildered and knowing the history of violence of this man, Magda's relatives went to report her disappearance to the authorities. However, the days went by and the investigation seemed to make no progress. It's strange, right? But if you've been watching these videos for a while, you already know how the authorities operate. The search was making no progress, as if they really didn't care, they didn't give a damn. How nice. The photographs and the search bulletin for the 28-year-old young woman flooded social media and the streets of Taxco de Alarcon. But no one had information about her whereabouts. The flyer described her as a slim girl, 1 meter 71 tall, with brown hair, pronounced cheekbones, large light brown eyes, and as a particular characteristic, she suffered from dermatitis on her hands. According to statements from Magda's relatives at the time of her disappearance, they asked for support from the municipal mayor, Omar Jalil Flores Majul. The official's response was to refuse to share the photo of the missing young woman on his social networks without giving much importance to the case. Or did he not give a damn either? And in turn, with each passing day, Magda's absence became more and more desperate. So the family itself began an independent search to find her. In addition, her relatives and friends went to the public ministry to ask the authorities to register the residence and the premises of her ex-partner located in the center of Taxco. They suspected Cesar's involvement and feared it might be too late.
The relatives, according to the versions that have occurred in the last 24 hours, pointed out that they asked that the ministerial police or the police enter this residence where the young woman Magdalena was presumed to be kidnapped. However, they reported that they were ignored.
The authorities could not refuse the search request as Magdalena had reported her ex-partner for violence. She went to the public ministry of Taxco but did not receive the expected attention. In turn, her loved ones were hoping for a positive response until a call changed everything. The person on the other end said, "Your daughter is at Caesar's house. He has her in cacerolas." January 22nd, 2018, 8 days after her disappearance, the authorities coldly and heartlessly communicated that Magda had been found in parts inside a beer and snack sales shop owned by Cesar Gomez, her ex-husband.
On Saturday, January 13th, the business where Magda's body was found was known as La Botanera, a place where beers and snacks were consumed. On 3rd Street of Guadalupe, number 5 in it, Adobes, number 5 Adobes neighborhood, Taxco de Guadalupe.
The authorities went to Caesar's business in the morning. There, on a 3-burner grill, was an enamel pot, with the young woman's arms and legs already cooked, as her remains were inside pots where they had allegedly been prepared. Pozole. The scene imagined shocked all of Taxco, but resonated nationally and internationally. Well, Magda not only lost her life suffocated by her ex-partner, but her body was also dismembered and placed, in addition to the pots, in a refrigerator and her pelvis in a plastic bag on the floor.
On a 3-burner grill, a blue pestle pot was found containing the cooked upper and lower limbs. Inside a refrigerator, the trunk of the body was found, which was semi-frozen.
Her ex-husband allegedly would have been responsible for such atrocity, and her mother, a woman identified as Sylvia N., was his accomplice. The cover-up was trying to get rid of her daughter-in-law's body by cooking it. The woman was immediately arrested by elements of the State Attorney General's office, but they could not arrest the main suspect. Because by that time, this coward had already fled. The authorities had wasted a lot of time. They didn't give a damn, I tell you again.
The arrest warrant was executed against Mrs. Sylvia. In relation to Cesar, his whereabouts for homicide are still being investigated. She is a co-participant. Why? Because the eyewitnesses to the events prefer that she actively participated in this.
The same day of the horrible discovery, through the cobblestone streets and the white colonial-style buildings of the magical town of Taxco, friends and family of Magdalena gave their final farewell to the 28-year-old woman whose remains lay in the wooden coffin. Her loved ones, friends, and neighbors displayed banners with legends that read, "We are all Magdalena, not one less alive. We love them. We want justice."
Today, another march took place in Taxco de Alarcón to demand justice for the murder of Magdalena, and as it has already been dubbed on social media with the hashtag Justice for Magdalena. As social organizations continue to be outraged by the situation in Taxco de Alarcón due to the situation this woman experienced.
Although the warm weather of Guerrero accompanied them, it was the outrage, sadness, and exhaustion of living in a country with so many distressed women. This was the prevailing mood in what is considered one of the most popular tourist sites in the state. At that moment, that city was not filled with laughter and color, but with stained red, with the blood of an innocent victim who only wanted the best for their family. Thus, before the grim scene took over the headlines of the most popular media and news outlets in the country with morbid and malicious titles, there was the story of a young woman who wanted to improve herself and support her family, until she took the life of the man she once called love. After the discovery, the young woman's remains were transferred to the Forensic Medical Service in Iguala, Northern Guerrero, while the State Attorney General's office opened an investigation file for the crime of femicide. If Cesar is found guilty, he could spend at least 40 years in prison.
The victim's brother, Saul Aguilar Romero, has repeatedly insisted that the crime should not be ignored, not just for having the mother of the femicide perpetrator detained, but to expedite the investigations to locate the man who took the life of his sister.
Unfortunately, the horror did not end with the perverse discovery of Magda's remains. Her 6-year-old son declared to the authorities that he was a witness, along with his little sister, of how their father took their mother's life. In front of their eyes and in the presence of their grandmother, the little one stated that Cesar's mom did nothing to prevent this brutality.
The alleged perpetrator's mom helped him commit the crime. In other words, what kind of story is this?
With this statement, Magdalena's mother-in-law was immediately sentenced to 40 years in prison, which meant she was going to spend the rest of her life rotting in jail. While justice had been served, there was still one piece left to find. The escape of the perpetrator triggered the issuance of his search warrant in Interpol. In addition, the Attorney General's office offered 500,000 Mexican pesos, which is about $24,000, as a reward to anyone who could provide information that would help locate him.
At this moment, the boy. Justice for my sister, so that Cesar Gomez, who is guilty of the murder, is brought to justice. My sister. He falls.
The police find him and make him pay.
During that time, feminist collectives, family and friends of Magdalena led multiple demonstrations to demand justice for the femicide that shocked the magical town of Taxco. But Cesar was not arrested immediately. On the contrary, he was a fugitive from justice for more than 4 years until his capture on July 9th of the year, 2022, in the city of Tijuana, where he was hiding. And apparently, the alleged perpetrator was arrested at night by municipal police from the tourist section of Tijuana when he was drinking, for redundancy, alcoholic beverages on a street in that border city.
This happened in Tijuana. Municipal police arrested Cesar N., who in 2018 murdered his ex-wife, then cooked her in some pots. Just imagine that.
When questioned by the authorities, Cesar told them his name was Maximo, but on 2 occasions he changed his last names from Herrera Garcia to Guerrero Garcia. This aroused suspicion among the officers, who chose to take him into custody until they could clarify their suspicions. And once they made the query in the national system, it showed his real name with his photograph. He was the man wanted for the crime of femicide.
The arrest occurred last night in Juan Bosco Alley between Revolution Avenue and 6th Street. The 36-year-old man did not resist during his arrest.
His arrest was announced during a morning press conference by the then-President Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, by the Undersecretary of Security Ricardo Mejia Verdeja, as part of the results of the Zero Impunity Program. And in turn, and after his arrest, the State Attorney General's office carried out the procedures for elements of the Guerrero Ministerial Police to carry out the transfer of the person responsible on a commercial flight to Mexico City. From there, he would travel by land in the early morning of the next day to the Tuxpan Cerezo Detention Center in Iguala, where he was finally made available to the control judge. And later, an initial hearing was held in which he was linked to the process and informed of the facts for which he was being accused. As a precautionary measure, they ordered preventive detention until the arrival of the trial. On the other hand, Magda's relatives thought that their suffering had ended with her detention, but there were still months of uncertainty ahead. And the fact is that a year after his capture, Cesar Gomez had not been sentenced. But it was expected that he would receive a similar or greater sentence, preferably to that of his mother, who meanwhile was awaiting the justice she deserved. The name Magdalena Aguilar Romero continued to resonate alongside all the women who have been victims of femicide in Mexico, a social phenomenon that has taken root as one of the deepest wounds of Mexican society.
We all are Magdalena. What are we looking for? Justice. What are we looking for? Justice. We are looking for justice.
Sol Aguilar Romero, who is Magdalena's brother, denounced that the authorities allowed the trial against Cesar to be postponed. In a video on his social media, Sol recalled his sister's case, and he accused the state of granting the alleged perpetrator the possibility of changing lawyers, which has resulted in the postponement of the sentence. That, on the other hand, the family is worried about the underage son, who was the one who witnessed this atrocity when he was just 6 years old. In fact, in the video, Magda's brother expressed his anger because his nephew, who is still underage, has been in psychological treatment for 5 years. And all spheres of his life collapsed, having to declare the horror lived because of this individual. The man said it was unfair that the authorities and the state did that to a child who, according to Sol, his nephew who was then 12 years old, was subjected to questioning and called to testify. Once again in the hearings where his father was granted a change of lawyer because, according to the criminal, he did not like his previous one. You don't just imagine this. Not only did it delay the trial against him even more, but the little one had to appear once again to recount what he experienced. That fateful day when his own father took his mom's life. Which makes you realize the ridiculousness of our authorities. Which in turn, according to the culprit's former brother-in-law, Cesar was playing with time, obviously, and the testimony of others to be able to gain more of the same time.
Testimonies from 2 minors with protected identities, children of the victim and eyewitnesses.
The victim's brother also claimed that his family has traveled from Taxco to Chilpancingo and Iguala in search of justice. In vain, as by that time the crime remains unpunished. For the family, Magdalena was a real terror. It was painful to go back to a stage where they already were. If for an adult it is simply painful, let's imagine what it must be for a little one. A constant re-victimization without knowing how much that is going to affect their emotional life later. We don't know how much, I tell you, but surely and sadly, it's going to be a lot. But well, finally Sol asked the citizens to share his video so it reaches someone who can advise his family, so that it's justice and the authorities in charge of the trial realize everything that's happening on their side. And so, 6 years after it was committed, one of the events that most shocked Mexican society and impacted the international press. The Attorney General's Office of the State of Guerrero finally had a verdict. After years of pain and constant struggle, a sentence of 55 years in prison was achieved. The suspension of his rights, the payment of a fine, and the corresponding to the repair of damage for Cesar Gomez Arciniega.
In November of 2023, the Attorney General of Guerrero managed to get Cesar sentenced to 55 years in prison. However, the victim's family argued that the judge did not consider the extreme violence with which Magdalena was murdered. The sentence was modified to the maximum sentence of 60 years in prison for femicide in April of this year.
In addition to the sentence extension, Cesar must pay almost 80,600 pesos, which is about $4,000. To Magdalena's family and her children aged 13 and 9 at the time of her sentencing, and they were left in the custody of their maternal grandparents, being sure that they will receive all the necessary love to cope with the loss of their parents.
So I wholeheartedly invite you. I just went to bury my daughter, but I'm stronger than ever. Why? Because I have 2 very beautiful grandchildren that my daughter left me, and I, along with my family, we are going to get my grandchildren and my children and the whole family ahead. I have 2 hands and was taught values. My daughter will not return. So I demand, and I tell you again, women, fight for your rights, and let's move forward. Let's go, Justa Magda.
On the other hand, the geophysicist and activist Maria Salguero, who 2 years ago started a database and generated a map of violence against women. She said there are more cases of femicides than those reported, but the prosecutors categorize them as homicides. Salguero, who preliminarily recorded over 1,100 femicides in the year 2017 throughout the country, explained that the authorities ignore international protocols on gender violence and consider them only homicides, because they want to hide the numbers to pretend that everything is fine and that they are addressing the problem. Most of these cases are not investigated or recognized as what they are, femicides, and in many, the police and public officials cover up the facts and criminalize the victims. The state is responsible not only for tolerating and promoting gender violence, but for laying the structural foundations for the majority of the population, men and women, to live in poverty and marginalization with low wages and precarious living conditions, situations where women from poor and working sectors are even more vulnerable, which in turn, according to the National Public Security System of Mexico, these types of cases increased violence against women by 72% in the country in 2 years. In 2017, authorities opened 667 investigation files for that crime, while in 2016 there were 580 files, and in 2015, 389 murders against women were documented. Unfortunately, Magdalena's case is not isolated in her city. In just the year 2017, Guerrero ranked second nationally among states with the most murders of women, with 219 femicides, 119 femicides. However, there were more violent deaths this year, as state prosecutors throughout Mexico recorded 2,585 deceased people or deceased women, which were investigated as homicides and not as femicides.
Today, they took my sister away from me. Tomorrow, we won't know if it will be your sister, your mom, your aunt, your niece. Why not? Even me too.
For Magdalena and for all the selfless women, every day in Mexico there is an urgent need to make the slogan of "Not One Less" a reality.
This is the office where she has been working all these months. Here the chairs of her patients are still waiting for her.
Remember that on Mondays on Pepe Misterio's channel, the interviews are uploaded at 2 in the afternoon Mexico City time. And if you have any story you would like to tell, whether you are a mother, a seeker, or someone you are looking for, or perhaps something that needs to be heard for it to be justice, can you send me an email to email@pepemystery.com.mexico, or if not, write me on Instagram that you find me as Pepe Mystery Mexico.